Now, will you notice this? Verses 17 and 18. And thus, after this manner rather, I saw the horses in the vision, or in my vision, as John says, and those that sat on them having breastplates as of fire, that is, fiery red, and hyacinth, and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths proceed fire and smoke and brimstone. And these are supposed to be tanks. Well, I don't object to somebody saying that. The only thing is, how do you know that they'll be using tanks in the Great Tribulation period? We're talking about a period that's in the future. This could well be, but I have a notion they're going to have something more refined and sophisticated for that period. By these 3 plagues was the third of men killed by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone that proceeded out of their mouths. Now notice the colors of these horsemen are not only striking, and they're colorful, but they're unnatural. The fire is fiery red, as we indicated, and hyacinth is the same color as the flower, dull, dark blue. And brimstone is light yellow. Now, the horse here is the animal of war. And actually, hell is now making war on mankind. That is the underworld, I probably should say. These creatures, they're unnatural from the underworld. And they're probably demons or demon control. This is a literal description of them. And I think Dr. Newell, in his book on Revelation, makes this very timely comment. Believe, and you scarcely need any comment. You know the problem today with men when they come to Revelation and say, oh, it's difficult to understand and you can't interpret it. My friend, the problem is you don't believe it. If you just believe it, read it. This is very clear as to the hellish forces that will be at work during this period. Now, these 3 plagues that are mentioned here, they're literal plagues. The fire is literal. The smoke is literal. And the brimstone is literal. You had that same thing at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I believe this world will be worse than Sodom and Gomorrah during that period. You talk about homosexuality attaining respectability. It did in Sodom and Gomorrah, but they went out of business. God put them out of business. And if you think God is going to permit mankind to go into eternity, an unnatural creature, I think you're wrong, my friend. Now, let's move on here. 1/3 of the population is killed, and 1/3 of nature had been affected before. But mankind had not been touched. Now, if the population of the world were 1.5 billion, then this would mean that 500 million would be slain. And remember that a 1/4 part had been slain under the 4th seal. This terrible decimation of the earth's populations seems incongruous with all of history until an atomic bomb fell upon Hiroshima. Since then, men have been using more frightening language than that of Revelation. They now talk of the total decimation of Earth's inhabitants. But the Lord Jesus said He won't permit it, that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. The human race would commit suicide. Now, I'm reading verse 19. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like serpents having heads, and by them they hurt. Unnatural horses that are able to kill with their mouths. The weirdest feat of all is that instead of horses' hairs for a tail, they have serpents, which also are used in destroying mankind. Now, verses 20 and 21. And the rest of men who were not killed by these plagues repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold and silver and copper and stone and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Now, the word sorcery in the Greek is pharmakeon. Now, pharmakeon is almost, by translation, pharmacy. And today, drugstores are called pharmacies. When I was a boy, they were called drugstores. Today, they are pharmacies. And, of course, now they sell everything. But pharmacy means drugs. It's the Greek word for drugs. So that we find out that during the Great Tribulation period, drugs have figured in to the lives of the unsaved a great deal. It, of course, serves several purposes. Drugs enable them to bear the judgments that we've had here of the Great Tribulation period. I'm sure that many a person in that period will turn to drugs when they're bitten by these locusts that have these stings in them. And these locusts stinging them, I'm sure that it's an awful thing. Although they don't die, they feel like they are going to die. And as a result, why we have here a taking of drugs to overcome the pain and help them endure the Great Tribulation. And then drugs will figure largely in the religion of that day. And it will be a regular drug culture and drug religion in the days of the Great Tribulation period. Now, what we are seeing today is very small compared to what it will be then. Also, there will be resorting to everything that will deaden the pain or attempt to lift them out of the trouble of the Great Tribulation. Liquor will become certainly very prominent again. It's certainly very prominent now. And the big problem in this country today actually is not drugs, but it's alcohol. And I've been over that now several times, but I want to read to you a statement from Dr. Seiss, or Seiss, as some call it. And Dr. Seiss, or Seiss, was at the turn of the century. The book I have of his was printed, I think, in 1906. That goes back a long ways. Now, I want to read his statement. And the reason I mention the date is I thought he wrote it yesterday. Or maybe he was preparing it for tomorrow's edition of your local paper. But let me read this statement, for this is his comment on the word sorcery. I'm reading now. We have only to think of the use of alcoholic stimulants, of opium, of tobacco, of the rage of cosmetics and medicaments to increase love attractions, of resorts to the pharmacopoeia in connection with sensuality, of the magical agents and treatments alleged to come from the spirit world for the benefit of people in this, of the 1,000 impositions in the way of medicines and remedial agents, encouraging mankind to reckless transgression with the hope of easily repairing the damages of nature's penalties, of the growing prevalence of crime induced by these things, setting loose and stimulating to activity the vilest passions, which are eating out the moral sense of society, for the beginnings of that moral degeneracy to which the seer here alludes as characteristic of the period when the sixth trumpet is sounded. And that's the end of the quotation. Now, very frankly, you would think that he had written that for today. But in his day, why, drugs and even alcohol was not used to the extent that it is today. There was no great drug culture, nor was drugs and alcohol such a big problem in his day as it is today. And these other things drugs that are mentioned here. And also, drugs are used today in practically all of these modern cults that use sex as a drawing card also. We are told here that they were guilty not only of sorceries, but of fornication, not only of indulging in drunkenness and in drugs, but also fornication, and that leads to thefts. Now, it's alarming today